What I've seen in 20 plus years is that the role of a CMO or a marketing lead has gradually diminished.
Digital marketing, I think, is one of the big reasons that marketing has become devalued, because everybody thinks they can do it, everybody thinks they can measure it. I think the fundamentals of marketing around revenue have been really lost.
The instant you miss a step or delay or slow down, you have just invited them. I mean, proper ticket, you're on the list.
Yeah.
Go in and start taking our customers.
Every M&A deal has a before and an after, and marketing almost never makes it into the room for either. So joining me today is Susie Vanner, and as a former EY partner and transformation specialist who's worked with some of the world's largest businesses through M&A and major change, Susie knows exactly what breaks and what doesn't when organisations go through those seismic shifts. So today, Susie's going to be sharing with us what that means for marketing leaders. So, welcome, Susie. And I know, because I've known you for a long time, you have quite possibly seen it all when it comes to large organisations, change, especially through M&A. And one of the things I know we wanted to talk about today is what typically breaks in commercial organisations during M&A. So kind of generally, where are the biggest risk areas that you've seen?
Well, lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite. I have seen a lot. The good, the bad and the ugly as it comes through. So what generally breaks? I think there are two things which stand out. So the first thing is that the value that the deal was predicated on often gets lost or diluted through the process of the deal. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, I mean that often acquisitions, when they're actually integrated, start absorbing practices and processes from the purchasing business which weren't the proposition, weren't the value proposition. So people leave, they're not incentivized in the right way, they're not motivated, and all of a sudden they dissipate. And the same happens with maybe the brand, the value that customers see, etc., going into it. So that value proposition and understanding it up front is absolutely critical, because if you lose that as the purpose and the sort of the thesis throughout an integration or even a divestment, then you've lost. Well, you put a whole load of money at risk, if not completely wasted it.
Against what made it valuable in the first place.
Against what made it valuable in the first place. So, when I take my time back to time in Dell, and I worked under some really big names that were well known in the industry as big integration specialists, they would very quickly assess what the value was, and that value assessment became the guiding principles that we had to run by and go through it. Critical. It doesn't matter what size business you are, you lose that and you've lost it.
Yeah. So, I see. So those value assessment elements, they're sort of like levers, and they guide a lot of the decision making during the integration of the two organisations.
Exactly. So, and the real challenge comes when you get down into the, beyond that original funnel of we've identified a business, we're going to move ahead with, let's assume an integration and we're buying it. And all of a sudden you get into that middle management layer and different functional leads, particularly of a purchasing business, start to want to impose their processes, their systems, their technology, their values on the business that you're buying. That may be nothing like the intent you had when you looked at this business. It may have been a geographical play, a market segment play, a brand play coming into it, and therefore consuming it, quite literally in some instances, into a bigger brand, and you've completely lost it.
And you lose the value that was there, don't you? And,
yes.
And then that can impact kind of the customer base, because I've seen it with companies that have been customers of ours who have been acquired in various scenarios. And it almost always happens that what made that company really special and really effective in the first place becomes constrained by that force of process. And, particularly if there's a strong geographical dominant player involved where previously things have been centralized and they've maybe bought an organization in a different geography, and you get two sets of completely different values. How can they make that not break? So you've got the guiding set of principles, but how, because the challenge always is, isn't it? How do you feed strategy down from the C-suite right down to those people at the coalface and communicate that effectively?
Well, great lead in, because my point number 2 is the communication, and that communication is fundamental, not even critical. It's beyond critical. It's like the fundamental basis for it, and so. Right from the very beginning, when you start to identify what you're doing, and this may not be that you're identifying a particular player. I mean, sometimes the confidentiality requirements are so tight that a tiny number of individuals know about the actual target or what the business is going to be and what the play is. That doesn't mean to say you can't message to your wider community, your business, the purchasing business, what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
There's the old, I'm not sure if it's an adage or a saying, but the cleaner at NASA was helping to put men on the moon, right? It's that kind of scenario. If every single one of your team don't have absolute clarity on what you are trying to achieve by going on an acquisition spree, whatever, one business, dozen businesses, then you've already lost it. Yeah. Because they have to be bought into that ultimate purpose.
And often you see, because this is obviously very common across the tech industry, you see a company gets acquired, and I'm talking mostly about private equity at this particular point, but a company will get acquired and then they will remove the C-suite and replace them entirely. And I understand the reasoning for that. But surely that must negate the whole purpose of buying the company in the first place for the inherent value within it.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And so I think there are different plays. And if you talk about private equity specifically, although this premise works even if you're a corporate business and industry buyer, you're going into that, again, let's assume an acquisition instance, you're going into that purchase and you have a particular value play, a reason, a purpose for doing that. And in your head, and private equity have this as very literal artifacts of value creation. Yeah. They will write a value creation plan. Their thesis will be based on it. The numbers, the valuation of the business is based on what they believe they can do in growing, evolving the business that they're purchasing. And so in order to retain that, you've got to communicate that, you've got to share that, you've got to have that as understood and go into it. When they start changing the C-suite, sometimes it is, and this can often happen, apologies guys, with owner-founder businesses.
Sorry, I won't take that personally.
It can be that an owner-founder-led business, the original intent and purpose isn't what the new owners want to achieve going forwards, okay? It may be that they want to change it, and that change might be degrees of, so it could be a small degree or a significant shift. That is hard for an owner-founder to come with on the journey.
Yeah.
Okay, because somebody might be saying, your product, your child isn't so pretty, but they can make it look really good. And you're like, well, I thought it was the best thing ever. And now you're telling me it's not. Yeah. So there are reasons for some of that change. Some of it is because you need to move on because they're not going to be with you on that ultimate journey, either sort of mentally or physically going through it. It may be that actually the business that you're purchasing and you're acquiring has a better, i.e. the value proposition is from something else. And something that we did, and it was a real foundational value in Dell, was once a value was identified in the acquisition, we looked to preserve it at all costs. And even if that meant the enormous business that was Dell Computers at the time, I mean, we were talking 200,000 people and 50 billion, had a process. If the process, the system, or the insight, whatever, was better in the acquisition, that's what got adopted in the main core of the business.
Oh, so like a reverse improvement.
A reverse, right?
Yeah.
And that is not common.
No,
because a lot of acquirers, and therefore by the way they are then perceived by the staff underneath them, and by their behaviours, all of a sudden, well, we're number one and you should. No. Preserve the value and communicate the perception of the purpose, what you want to achieve. And then that gives everyone the remit to make the right decisions, protect the value, and then clearly grow their business, their role, their opportunity going into it. That short-termist nature of we're the number one dog and you're not is exactly that. It will be limiting.
Because it dilutes the value, like you said right at the beginning, and rather than incorporating that value into the purchasing organisation.
Exactly.
So, And as I said at the beginning, marketing are rarely in the room when all of these conversations. I've worked in companies that have been acquired, and marketing is often the last to know.
Yes. Yes.
Let alone not being in the room. And then often what I see is their marketing is scrabbling around to accommodate the customer story, all the different various elements to protect customer experience, to protect demand, the brand, all the things that you mentioned. Firstly, how can they get in the room? Mm-hmm. What skills do they need? Because we talk a lot about a commercial marketeer. So building those skills. If you're a marketeer, you need to speak the commercial language. So what gets them in the room? And if they can't get in the room, how can they, if they get a whiff that an acquisition is happening, how can they get ahead of some of these challenges?
Yeah, and you're right to split it because there's two very different things here. So I think what I've seen in 20 plus years is that the role of a CMO or a marketing lead has gradually diminished. Okay, so they are now less and less in that boardroom, in that exec suite. But interestingly, the number of execs that are in that room has increased. Right, so now you have chief customer officer, chief digital officer, chief data officer, chief revenue officer. They're things that didn't really exist 20.
Chief growth officer.
Chief growth officer, right?
This year.
And so, as a deals person, when I look at this, why were they in the room historically? Marginally, maybe 30% of the time, and largely through industry purchases, not the private equity stuff. Private equity was always very, very focused on the financial diligence. Even operational diligence was something that has come much later going into it, and largely has only really come to bear based on businesses getting badly bitten by operations really not being anywhere near the level of effectiveness or efficiency that they were perceived to be. And yet the value play is often within the sales, marketing and operational scope.
Yeah,
okay?
because brands have value, don't they?
They have value, right? So it has diminished over time. The other challenge, and I'm sort of jumping to the second question a little bit, it is how can they bring themselves back in? They have to talk the language of the deal. Yeah. Okay. And this is where another disconnect has happened. So as you've got this sort of multiplicity of individuals whose hands are in that marketing arena, and I'm talking very broadly, but someone's doing top of the funnel, someone else is doing the digital marketing piece. You've got data completely separate to this. Mm-hmm. They've got to talk deal value. They've got to talk about the return on investment. They've got to be able to measure that marketing. Mm-hmm. And where you go back to maybe older types of marketing responses, it would be about brand awareness and engagement. Not to say they're not important. We'll come back to that, remind me, but they are really important. Yeah. But they're not the language of margin, revenue, EBITDA, valuation of the business. Yeah. Okay. Could they be? Yes. Should they be? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Because it really sits there. So there's been this erosion because I think the end-to-end, the ability to join up what marketing means and the return it can provide has become diluted.
Oh, that is such a good point.
And the messaging, as that dilution has happened, where's the single point of ownership? Yeah. So who's on the hook? Yeah. Because in deals, there's got to be somebody on the hook for it. Otherwise, no one does it.
And are they facilitated with the systems, the reporting, all those sort of mechanical elements that they need to be on the hook? Because what I see so much of the time is they're being held on the hook for things that they're not equipped to measure. Absolutely.
Right. So there's been this big shift, a big shift in are they seen there less and less? The size of the organisation, as the exec board has increased, other people have parts of it, and other people are talking the CEO or the purchaser's language. Yeah. And yet none of them own that end-to-end coming into it. Yeah. Let me just jump back into something else that you mentioned, because I think it's incredibly important. When we look at how brand awareness, customer experience is always sat firmly under that marketing umbrella, and that's a great understanding, the competition to the two businesses that are coming together is watching you like a hawk. Yeah. Because the instant you miss a step or delay or slow down, you have just invited them. I mean, proper ticket, you're on the list. Yeah. Go in and start taking our customers. Because if that level of, and back to the value proposition and what you're doing, isn't fundamentally clear, not just internally, but to your customer base, okay, then they're confused. Yeah. There's no gap. It's I understand or I don't understand.
Which erodes trust.
Binary,
Yep.
okay? And therefore, you literally open up your market, your customer base to massive erosion, dilution at best. And all of that means that even if it was the best and the sweetest deal in the world with the most perfect value proposition that nobody recognized or understood until you told them after, you're now in a downswing that you've now got to come back up from. And we all know that being up and creating momentum is a far easier than trying to build momentum from a lower position.
Yeah, for sure.
So instantaneously, you've literally shot yourself in the foot. And through, frankly, no good reason.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that I bang on about all the time. It's partly why the podcast is called Soapbox, because I'm always going on about stuff. Because I do feel that I'm seeing more and more actually that the CMO role is actually disappearing.
It is,
which is quite concerning. And I, you like you say, you got CRO, you got Chief Growth Officer, you've got Chief Digital Officer, which spans marketing and IT, which you never thought that would happen. So it's a bit of a mess, really, and I see it everywhere. So how can CMOs guide their teams? Because if the CMO isn't in the room during the conversations and they're picking up all the bits and pieces, they've then got a whole team that they've got to motivate, possibly across multiple geographies. What are the, without making it really complicated, where are the key areas that they could help their team thrive in that kind of environment?
So I think there's a staged approach, and let's make the assumption that the CMO role has not been aware of what's going on. Maybe an inkling, the gossip, it's always the worst known secret or the best known secret, right? Going out there. But let's assume that they haven't been involved in that. Number one is make sure you are doing the absolute utmost on your core basics. Okay, that value is understood, that your customers feel loved, that you're doing all of the really core basics. Don't get fancy. Don't try and start new stuff. All right, really, really focus on the core basics and make sure that up so that it's strong and everyone gets it. Because you can do that at any point. All right, you don't need to know the other stuff.
Permission to do that.
Then as soon as the deal is announced or you're brought into that inner circle, which generally will happen before signing, but not up front, and you may have missed the diligence, get up to speed super fast and make sure that you start looking at the language that you use. So I'm going to use an extreme here. Don't go with the fluffy. I'm not suggesting your marketeers do. I'm with you. But what I do think is that a lot of people in the deal space, that is the perception that you have to eliminate, okay, with data, with insight and with reality. And that reality is data, but it's also the clarity of an action plan. Because you're talking to a bunch of people that didn't include you, probably because they don't understand it and they don't think it has value. So if you can immediately show solid foundation, value, and a plan which they understand, because it's...
And how the plan is going to increase that value.
At the beginning, you don't even need to do that. You just need to show what you're going to do to start integrating, how you're going to start measuring it, and bring, I suppose, the artifacts from each business together and how that will align. And is it as simple as you're going to incubate and we keep them separate for a short time, and at what point do you start bringing it together? And that just means that those two businesses, those functions come together very tightly. Now, you then start to come into real challenges on confidentiality and data sharing until that deal is signed. But it's not without the opportunity to do something.
Yeah, and to shift your language, because I see this all the time. Marketeers talk in MQLs, SQLs, and really outside of the marketing team, that's irrelevant.
Exactly.
It should not be even discussed. It should all be about pipeline. And like you say, pipeline, ROI and margin, all EBITDA, all of those things, and running. And I think it's a skill that has been lost for a lot of marketeers over the last 25 years because, and I've talked about this before, where I'm old enough to remember when the internet came in, let alone digital marketing. And digital marketing, I think, has been one of the big reasons that marketing has become devalued. Because everybody thinks they can do it, everybody thinks they can measure it, and that measuring clicks and opens and all of those things is magic, and it isn't. And I think the fundamentals of marketing around revenue have been really lost, and it's a shame.
I agree with you. There's a Gartner report, I think it was probably end of last year that talks about something like 65 to 70% of the C-suite, including CMOs, recognise that AI and technology is going to start to change at least the perception, if not the reality, of marketing.
Yeah.
Only 32% of that same cohort believe they need different skills in that role.
Wow.
Now, so that says to me there's a massive gap between their understanding of how the world is changing and what they need to do that. Now, on that, let me give you some heartening information as well, because that's quite worrying.
Yeah, let's not finish on that.
On the heartening side of it, there is also, I'm starting to see a movement back into, whilst everyone recognises that AI and technology will change how we work, what we do, and the nature of the style of work we do, there is beginning to be a real focus on the human at the centre again. So bringing it, I mean, thank goodness we're all humans and we want to make sure that's true. Yeah. But the reality is, how do you provide a point of difference when everyone has access to the same technology? And the reality is, it's individuals, it's humans, it's experience and understanding.
Creativity, context.
That will do that.
Yeah,
okay?
Absolutely.
And that experience of understanding over a duration through different situations is going to be massively important. So I don't think it eliminates marketing as a role, as a job function. Is it going to be fundamentally different? I suspect so.
Yes, definitely. And 100%, because it's a tool at the end of the day. And you know, at the moment it's a tool that will change. I know, you know, the technology is developing so fast, it's hard to keep track. But I think and it's like advice across the board about AI. You've got to get ahead of it. You can't ignore it. You can't pretend it's not going to change things drastically. But you can use it to help you. Exactly. You know, you can use it to help you to learn how to be more commercial and how to flip things. You don't have to necessarily go and learn all those skills from scratch. You know, I think it's so just to sort of finish up. Because I think we could possibly sit here and talk about this
absolutely
for a lot longer. Because I find the whole M&A thing fascinating anyway. Because you know it's all about people at the end of the day. Because it's all about change, and the only thing that makes change work is people and communication and those different elements. So if you had, I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here, but if you had 2 or 3 pieces of advice to give to a CMO, a marketing leader, who is possibly about to or is just going through this and is feeling excluded, you know, not quite sure where to turn because they're not being given guidance on anything. Could be as straightforward as they don't even know what their budget is for this year, but yet they're being expected to still deliver results. I mean, I see this all the time. So what are the 2 or 3 key things that you think they need to focus on?
I think it's ensure that your language, your narrative starts to mirror the key objectives and strategy of the business. Now, I know that sounds obvious. What I really mean is, rather than talking about engagement and experience, whilst they are incredibly important, they're like your level 2 going down. So start looking at, how do you show what you spend $1 to how many gained? How do you totally tie that in? And I would actually start becoming the person that connects all of these other functions together. So there is a temptation for everybody in change to double down into your space that's really comfortable. Yeah. In the current flow, the scenario at the moment is, I think a lot of leaders are assuming that the current crisis is only that. It's a crisis, it will go away and we will survive it later. Okay. And a deal can feel just like that.
Yeah.
Okay. It's 6 months of absolute hell.
Yeah.
The reality is, it's going to be a new paradigm. And that stands for today in the current economic environment, as it does in a deal. There will be a new paradigm. Yeah. So don't double down only on what you do. Be great at what you do, and then maybe start to become the connector, talking the language of those that are around the table, and start to reflect the value that can be brought. And you might have to take a punt if you don't know your budget. If you give me X value, I will generate Y. Yeah. And here's how. So evidence it all the way through and go into it. Yeah. But take that leap. Do work with the technology. Make it work to your advantage. It is a facilitation tool, all right? And it absolutely can help you do more. And the way I talk to big business is, it's a cost saving. And the way I talk to smaller businesses, it's a scaling device, okay? But you can't go into it with ignorance. And therefore, your tenured, experienced marketeers fabulous.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. That facilitation tool will really expedite your productivity.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I think those things alone, they sound simple, they sound obvious.
Well, often the best things are, aren't they?
But honestly, so many people avoid doing that and stating the obvious because they've made an assumption that everyone gets what they do. And the reality is they can't because you're not at the table.
And sometimes there's a lot of fear in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like the old adage, you know, don't wait for permission, beg for forgiveness later, because it's that latter approach that generally leads to innovation and success.
Exactly. And when you start to do, when you have boards or exec teams come together, there's often cuts at a certain grade level. You know, you don't need 2 of every role going into it. There's a clear cost saving.
So, Susie, we have a new segment that we have added into our podcast, and unfortunately, you're the guinea pig.
Right.
So it's called the hot seat, and we want to get 3 fast takes on particular topics related to what we've just been talking about. So there are no wrong answers. So let's go. Most leaders say people first during M&A. We talked about that. How often is that actually true?
It's always the intent. And I'd say that it's 50-50 on the reality.
Excellent. Marketing. Oh, we also talked about this. I'm loving the segues. Marketing is always seen as the cost centre, never the growth engine. When does that change?
Start to align your language, get the measurement in place, and then educate people on the delivery.
Nice. And last one. If you had to protect just one thing during a restructure, what would it be and why?
Oh, this gets back to the first point, value. Yeah. Understand your value up front and don't let it get eroded by the middle, I want to say management, but the middle group of people trying to get process sorted.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susie. Excellent job on the hot seat questions. And thanks again for a really interesting chat. I know that M&A is a huge source of stress within the B2B marketing community. So I think getting a little peek under the hood will have been really useful. So thank you.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much.